This is Tell Me What to Read, powered by Booktopia. I'm Nick Wasiliev, and today we sit down for two conversations with two extraordinary authors in coordination with Kids Month, celebrating all things kids books. In our first interview, Sarah McDuling, our Kids and YA category manager, sits down with Nina Kenwood, author of Unnecessary Drama. Then, in our second interview, Sarah sits down with Dani Vee, author of My Extraordinary Mum. Check the show notes for timestamps for both interviews, and if you're enjoying our show, you can drop us a review on Apple Podcasts, a like on Spotify, wherever you are listening to our show. Let us know what you think. Now, over to our interview with Nina Kenwood, author of Unnecessary Drama, which you can order in the description right now from booktopia.com.au.
Hi, I'm Sarah McDuling, and I am very excited to be talking today with the wonderful Nina Kenwood, author of It Sounded Better in My Head and her upcoming book, Unnecessary Drama. Nina, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me here, Sarah.
So before we launch into all the trillion burning questions I have for you about Unnecessary Drama, which I think is probably my favourite book of the year, more on that later. Would you mind just giving listeners like a little bit of a rundown of what they can expect from Unnecessary Drama?
Yes. So Unnecessary Drama is a rom-com set in a Melbourne student share house during first year uni. Brooke is a kind of type A, very neurotic character who is leaving her small town and her family for the first time to move to Melbourne for uni, and thinks she's moving into a house with sort of two strangers. But then she discovers that one of her housemates is actually Jessie, who she knows from high school, and they have a complicated history, let's say. And they are not friends as the book begins. And it's a love story. It's also a coming of age book. It's a making new friends book. It's a moving out of home story, and it's a living with anxiety story. So I guess it's all of those things together. But at its heart, it is a rom-com.
And it truly is, hearing you list all the things, it's truly all of those things, and truly comes with all of the connected emotions. Like, I think I literally experienced every human emotion pretty much while reading the book. You had me laughing, crying with laughter at some point, and just like paralyzed with angst in other parts. It was just wonderful. But I don't want to. It's been 3 years since It Sounded Better in My Head, right? Yes. More or less.
Yes.
So before we start talking about plotty kind of character-y stuff, because I feel like I'm going to get carried away there and there's the potential for me to lose track, I did want to ask you, before we get into that, what's your life been like since, publishing your first book and now your second book, and what was your journey to publication sort of like, and what was the experience of writing the second book like versus the first book?
Well, everyone says have your second book written before your first book comes out, so that whatever happens with your first book is not going to impact, you're not going to get in your head and sort of derail you when you go to write your second. But I was pregnant in the lead up to my first book coming out, and I couldn't write at all. I was just in survival mode, so there was no chance of having a second book done. So first book comes out, and it was wonderful, and I loved the experience. Everything went so well. It was 2019. I was like, okay, 2020, this is gonna be a great year. I'm going to I've got a baby, but everything's gonna be fine. I'm gonna handle the baby, I'm gonna go back to work, I'm gonna write my second book. So I was feeling very hopeful at the beginning of 2020. And then, of course, it was not the year that I thought it was going to be. Things took a turn pretty early on. And I am an anxious person, and I went into a state of extreme anxiety, and just a lot was going on. I had a baby who I was putting into daycare for the first time while I was trying to go back to work, but there was COVID, and so it was like in and out of daycare and what to do about COVID, and all of that was sort of taking up all of my mental space. So I was really struggling to write, to find my way back to the kind of book I wanted to write. I did start writing, but it was mostly what I call my draft zero, which is like just trying to find the character's voice. So it was mostly a lot of internal Brooke's voice and her anxiety, and that's where I found a lot of her voice. But there was no plot, there was nothing happening. I couldn't figure out what to do with the book. I couldn't break my way into it, mostly because of what was happening in the world. And it did feel like, should I be writing about COVID? Should the whole plot be about COVID? But it was like, well, I don't even know what's, in 2020 we kept thinking, well, COVID will be over soon. So, and then I knew I wanted it to be a sort of enemies to lovers, but I didn't know, I couldn't figure out how to bring them together. Like when two characters don't begin as friends, and you've got to, the romance, you've got to have barriers, but you've also got to keep bringing your two characters together. And finally, in about October of 2020, because I kept a diary of the process of writing the second book, just to track it. It was all pretty depressing throughout 2020. It was like, I can't write. I'm very worried about COVID. I'm very worried about the world. And at some point, we during one of the long lockdowns, we moved in with my parents. So there was a lot of like, my parents are driving me crazy. So there was a lot of writing stuff happening in my writing diary. But in October 2020, I figured it out. They're going to live in a share house together, because I needed something to unlock the proximity problem and why they keep interacting. And I also figured out, and I had this note to myself which is something I learned during my first book as well, but I had to relearn, was don't sort of, when I try and write out of anger or fear, I never get anywhere. Write towards joy and make the writing joyful and enjoy it. And that's, once everything clicked, then it all kind of came together sort of throughout 2021. Yeah.
And now here it is, ready to go out in the world. At the time of recording, we're still a little bit ahead of release date. You mentioned finding your character's voice. So let's talk about Brooke. When It Sounded Better in My Head came out, I was like so obsessed with Natalie, because it just felt like she struck right to the heart of such everyone's human insecurities that it was impossible not to love her. And so when I was picking up your next book, I wanted a hit of the same thing, but in the back of my head, I'm just like, I don't know if I'm going to like another character as much as I liked Natalie. But turns out I can. Brooke is amazing. She's such a just deeply lovable and flawed, but also self-aware main character. I feel as though one of the most relatable things about her is that while she has this deep set need to like do everything well and look after everyone and make sure everyone is okay, she always wants to help people, but she cannot accept help for herself, even when she most desperately wants it. Would you say that's like a fair assessment of her character?
Yes, that is a exact and very brilliant assessment of her character.
So I guess I wanted to know, like, I do firmly believe every friendship circle has a Brooke type, like someone who does organize all of the events, collect the birthday money, remember birthdays, one who shows up with the best food platter and is always like looking out for others, and the designated driver, and like
that's right.
Do you have that person in your friendship group, or are you that person in your friendship group?
When I was younger, I was much more that person. And so I was definitely tapping into younger teenage me. There was a lot of there was a lot of that. I was the person who definitely looked after people at parties, and often organised things. And so Brooke is not me, but I was drawing on younger me. I'm much more chaotic and less organised now. I have let go of some of that. Not sure it was has made my life better, but yes. So I was definitely drawing on that, and also the idea. So Brooke is the younger sister, and I feel like there's often the cliche is that the older sister is in that mothering role, and I really wanted to explore the idea of when you're the younger sister, kind of in your sister's shadow, but also you take on that role for a variety of reasons, and that kind of interesting dynamic.
I did find the dynamic between Brooke and her sister to be really interesting, especially you did mild spoiler, no details, right? This is more of a expression of feelings I had through the course of the book without actually pinning them to what happens. But I loved that you set up their relationship, and it's a compelling dynamic in and of itself. But then you do delve into it deeper through the course of the novel and like look at things from the other side. So having done my own stint of share house living, I couldn't help feel like I was in a time machine in this book. You so perfectly captured like both the joy and the difficulty of living in a share house, you know, as particularly a tumble down share house with a million quirky issues, and also balancing and how much fun it can be and how hard it can be balancing everyone's personality quirks and habits, particularly a person like Brooke who has high anxiety, the difficulty of carving out your own space when you're living with new people away from home. Was this something that you wrote from your own experience? Did you have a stint in share house?
I have done share house living, and but it was sort of drawn from that, but also a lot of different friends' share houses that I've been in as well, and hearing their stories, and a lot of different, I guess I've been exposed to many different share houses over the years through myself, friends, family, and so it's a kind of drawing on any kind of good story that I've heard or seen, and kind of bringing it all together. And to be honest, like I still, at the time of writing this, I was living in a rental house that was an old house that had a lot of issues. So it wasn't, I didn't have to look far to look for to get in the headspace of what is it like to live in a falling down old house.
So let's talk about the romance, because this is such a delightful romance. I guess it's childhood best friends / enemies to lovers, right? That's sort of the journey.
Yes, friends to enemies to lovers.
With a
kind of
healthy
slow burn.
Yeah, slow burn. Definitely forced proximity.
Yes.
You've got all the best tropes in here. I really love it. Was it when you have this particular trope, and I have to say it's one of my all-time favorites, which is that, you know, the enemies to lovers angle. It requires, particularly when it's friends to enemies to lovers, a betrayal, right? Like there has to be something that has caused this rift.
The rift, yep.
Yeah, and I think what you find with a lot of romances, I love rom-coms, I love romances, and I feel like there's a mindset you get into often in that genre where you're just very forgiving of the outlandish ways that people bend reality to get tropes happening. But what I love about unnecessary drama is that you didn't do that. It's all extremely believable. The betrayal is real. Like, you feel like that would hurt me. I would still be nursing that grudge years later. The way that they're brought back together, extremely believable, extremely, you could just imagine all of that happening. So I guess I wanted to ask you a little bit about how you put all that together and how you decide which tropes you want to sort of go after, or is it more organic than that?
Look, I love tropes. I do love tropes. But yes, I feel like it has to come organically. the backstory took a long time to get right, and I rewrote it, and it still wasn't right. Just to get, I mean, it sounds so, it's just one chapter, and but everything hinged on what caused this rift, and making it something that wasn't bad enough or too bad, on finding the right balance that would work for them emotionally took a really long time. And it's one of those pieces where once you get it right, suddenly the whole story works so much better. So that was one of those, this sort of tentpole scenes that really I worked really hard and rewrote to get right, and that backstory was one of them. I don't want there to be spoilers. There's this, I don't know if it's a spoiler to say that there's a first kiss. There's a kiss somewhere in the book, and I rewrote that scene and everything around it a lot, and worked really, really, really hard on that scene. And yeah, there's a couple of other scenes throughout the book that do connect with tropes, I think, that I worked really hard on, because I do think it's really important to ground everything emotionally. It's got to feel real. It's got to feel real and feel like something that would happen to a teenager, and keep you emotionally there in the story, and not feel like, oh, I'm reading a trope, while still engaging in the, tropes are wonderful and they're everywhere through everything, because that's, they're part of storytelling. So it's like making it work for the book, I guess, and really working hard at the key scenes that I knew where the emotional turns are that needed to work for this book to work.
We absolutely nailed it. And I don't think it's a spoiler to say there's a kiss. If I was picking up a book with the blurb that So Drama has and there was no kissing, I'd be really mad. And that scene you mentioned was perfect. The backstory holding things up, perfect. I think we like tropes because they've arisen out of a kind of very human, emotional thing that happens, right? Like, I don't want to use the word cliche because that has negative connotations, but the trope is established for a reason. It's because it's something we like. Human beings like this.
Exactly.
But then the more a trope is used again and again, like the more of a shorthand it becomes. And I think a lot of times you slip into a mindset where you're just like, oh, don't think about it too much, and I love reading a book like yours that strips it back down to reality and allows you to have all of the fun of those situations that you love, and the pure emotion of those tropes in a really grounded, really like a non-tropey story, if that makes sense. Like,
yes, that's basically what I was trying to do. Like, keep it feeling as as real and authentic and real life as possible, while still getting that fun stuff in there. Finding that balance, and every author has to find that balance, and the rhythm and how they want it all to work, and it takes a lot of work.
I think that's, if I was going to try and explain to someone, because if you happen to be listening to this podcast, I just want you to know that never in my career at Booktopia, I don't think that I can recall, have I read a book pre-release twice. Like, that's just not something I normally do. There's so many books that are coming out. You have to read so much, and I just don't think it's ever happened before. But it happened with Unnecessary Drama, and not only did it happen almost accidentally, because I didn't intend to read it twice. I read it, I loved it, I had high expectations for it because I loved your first book. So I went in with high expectations. It surpassed those expectations. And then I was like, okay, well, that's done. I've read the book, great. And I'm really looking forward to chatting to Nina, and I'm doing, that's my job done. I've read the book, I love it. Now I'll get to talk to Nina about it. And then this week, as we were coming up, that was a few months ago now. And then as we were coming up to record the podcast this week, I thought, I think I'll just like flip through the book again and just refresh my memory. Like, so that it's nice and fresh before I talk to Nina. And apparently it's not possible to just flip through this book, because Brooke's voice, not even kidding, from the first sentence, I was like, oh, I guess I'm on this ride again. Like I read the whole thing cover to cover again, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, perhaps even more than the first time.
Oh,
and
thank you. This is all like the highest compliment any author could ever be given. Thank you so much.
It's just, it's going to be the book that, much the same as when It Sounded Better in My Head came out, it's going to be the book that I'm just telling everyone that they must read.
Thank you so much.
It's glorious. It's also funny. Like, it is very romantic. It's very poignant. There's a lot of, heavy emotional stuff that goes on in here. It's not by no means, and I don't say this in a derogatory way. I love light, frothy rom-coms. I love them. I have the utmost respect for them. It's an art form. But your book, whilst having, a lot of the same beats as a light, frothy romance, is underpinned by a lot of heavier emotional content than you often expect to find.
Yes.
In a book that's this funny and this cute and this romantic. But I guess I wanted to talk about humour when you're balancing it with things that are more serious. And can you tell us a bit about your approach to sort of balancing the emotional journey of this book? Because how is it possible that I can be beside myself with laughter? Like, literally, I cried. Like, I had to put the book down. I'm not going to, there's a scene that involves a waiter. That's all I will say. And I just lost it, right? And then shortly afterwards, I was just absolutely paralyzed with angst, unable to, like, just completely anxious about what was going to happen next. So the question here, I guess, is just, how are you so cool? Like, how are you able to do that? How do you do that thing?
That is very nice. This particular book, as I said, I wrote, I think it came out of a lot of her, the darker elements and the anxiety. I think it came from having this like draft zero version there was no humor in that version. It was just like a lot of me being anxious and finding Brooke's voice and delving into like her and her past and figuring out what makes her tick. And so I had like 60,000 words of, like, often it was just internal thoughts and dialogue. It wasn't even what you would call, there was no plot, there was nothing, just random scenes and figuring her out. And so it was like taking that and then overlaying the love story and the rom-com and the humor and weaving it all together, I guess. And so it was like having this blueprint of who Brooke is and the darker elements of, just what various things that are the difficulties in her life and what shapes her and who she is, and making sure that blueprint is there and you come back to it and it's sort of underpinning the emotional journey. So for the emotions to hit and the humor to hit, I feel like you do need that depth and everything has to feel grounded. And there has to be a sense that, there is darker stuff or can be heavier stuff going on with these characters. And it's not a book that is going to delve into them or solve any of that, really. And it's just really there to say, because not everything does. Like, these aren't issues that can be solved. And everyone has stuff going on in their life that is trickier or darker, or the less pleasant side of things, or the stuff that you grapple with. And in my first book it was a lot about bodies and body image, and in this one it's more internal stuff for her and family stuff. And so it's sort of like, that's all there. It's not going to all be solved or fixed. But it's there, it's part of who she is, so it's part of the story, I guess. And the same as Jessie has stuff going on as well, and it sort of allows them to bond in various ways as well. So I guess that's how I'm not sure if that answers that, but that's how I kind of think of it, as like grounding the characters in and letting them have all this stuff going on, but then I want this reading experience to be completely joyful and and funny, you know, and trying to make a book funny that takes a lot of work as well. Like, it's hard to sort of, I'm trained myself to try and not be so self-depreciating and like, oh, no, I'm not funny. So it's like, yes, I've written a funny book. It's okay to say, especially as a woman, you kind of, oh, thank you. It's hard sometimes to say, yes, my book's funny, because you feel like people are going to be like, who do you think you are? But yeah, I worked hard to make it funny. I think it is funny. So thank you.
It absolutely is. And I think what I'm hearing when you talk is that in a book like this, to have the high highs and the low lows, really each one heightens the other.
Right.
So you can lose it at the funny parts because you're releasing tension. And then because you've released that tension, you can go back to the worry and the pain, and it all just conveniently together. I know we're running out of time, but I feel like I've only asked you half the things that I want to ask you. I will just push the limits a little bit and just ask, are you able, I did want to call out the covers. I like to sort of just take things to a superficial level at one moment, because the covers of both of your books are so gorgeous. Yeah.
And, cover it's not superficial to me. It's, it's hugely important. It's like, this is all people see when they sort of see a book on the shelf or on the screen. That's
advertisement for your book. Yeah.
It's important.
It's a gorgeous cover. Were you much involved with the cover artist?
I was involved in that. I sort of said I would love, because it's a scene from the book essentially, and I said I had this vision of, yes, this could work, this scene, could we bring it to life? And text is so good at covers, and so I sort of was, rambling like, maybe this and maybe that and this scene, and they took my very unformed thoughts and ideas and found the perfect illustrator and worked with her and brought it to life. And I just love everything about it, the colors, the vibe. They captured everything perfectly. Yeah, so I was so happy.
Well, when you see those two people sitting on the couch, you can sense the underlying romantic tension just from the cover image. And then when you get up to that moment in the book where you realize you're seeing what's depicted on the cover, you're like, it's that great moment where you're like, oh, that's why the book's called this, or that's why, like, it was, it's just perfect. I can't praise the book higher. It's effusive, and I worry that when I'm talking like this that it just sounds too much, but I can't. I'm like literally speechless with how much I enjoyed the book, and it's so fresh in my mind because I just reread the whole thing.
Look, I'm not going to stop you from talking like this. In fact, I'll probably go back and listen to this podcast. This is like what feeds an author's ego they need in the dark times when I'm trying to write the next book, and it's like, I can't do this. No, I'll go back and listen to Sarah.
Well,
someone believes in me.
I will. I'm like, look, I said after your first book that I can't wait to find out what Nina Kenwood writes next. Now I've got what you've written next, and I love it. Are you in a position to talk about what's up next, or is it too soon?
Look, it's and this is what I do always say this when I'm in the midst of writing, which is it's not going well. It never feels like it's going well, but I think that's what every author says. I am in the midst of trying to write something new. I think the next one is going to be an adult book, but still in the same kind of feel, but an older character.
I think that's wonderful. I'm really excited to hear that.
Yeah. Well, not obviously. I'll never give up my YA roots and love, and but
no,
yes,
but you can do both. Why not
exactly.
both?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, Nina, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for your reading my books, your support. It's so wonderful.
Oh, it's an honor and a privilege. And thank you so much for Unnecessary Drama. It's a pure delight. And for everyone listening, you can grab your copy of Unnecessary Drama, as well as if you have not already read it, it sounded better in my head, at your local bookstore or online at Booktopia. Thanks for listening and never stop reading.
Now over to our conversation with Dani Vee, author of My Extraordinary Mum, which you can order in the description right now from booktopia.com.au.
Hi, I'm Sarah McDuling, and I am giddy with glee, like absolutely beside myself with joy. Like, it sounds like I'm being sarcastic. I'm being deadly serious. I'm
good,
like
sure.
grinning so hard it hurts to be sitting opposite the delightful Dani Vee, to be talking about your debut picture book, My Extraordinary Mum.
Oh, how exciting to just be here, to be in this fancy studio, to have signed 250 books, no pressure, and to just be here with you chatting on a podcast. It's really awesome.
Bless you for calling our studio fancy.
Well, no one can see. They've got to take my word for it. Gold floors, gold columns.
Solid gold everything.
I've been eating lobster and caviar since I got here.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Foot massage afterwards.
Oh, can it be during?
Oh, no. I'm letting the team down, really. It should have been during. So we should talk about your book, which I have just seen today in its full, beautiful, real-life self for the first time. And it is gorgeous.
Thank you.
And you must be so proud of it. And can you just tell the people listening a little bit about the book?
Thank you for loving it. It's always really nerve-wracking when someone says, oh, I haven't seen this in its whole entirety, and then they pick it up and be like, oh, I love it, please love it.
Come on, that hasn't happened.
Happens all the time. But yeah, so My Extraordinary Mum was sort of born out of a conversation I had with my kids. And, you know, instead of them thinking that I'm just the boring person who tells them to brush their teeth every night, and when I say tell, usually yell, I started talking about, you know, what I used to do before I had them, and it was travelling the world and doing all this fun stuff. And then I was starting to talk to other amazing women that I know who, you know, have done all these amazing things as well. And it dawned on me that my kids and our kids didn't know that. And I thought, what a missing part. You know, you think you know someone so well, we all live together in the house, and look, most nights, let's face it, we sleep together because they crawl into the bed, and they still don't know you. And so I thought, how cool is that to have this book where it just shows another side of a mum? As well as that, I was kind of a bit tired of the dominant narrative that I feel that's out there, particularly in TV, where mums are the Band-Aid bringers and stopping the fun from dad's always having the fun and they're just bringing the food and the floaties. And, you know, we're fun too. Sometimes we forget because being a mum's pretty hard. But I just wanted to sort of bring that joy and fun back, and that motherhood can have many components. So yes, it does have to have the brush your teeth, that's important, but it can also be the let's go rollerblading, let's go on an adventure. You know, we can have a joy and fun coupled with that as well.
I love that. I love flipping a stereotype. And I feel as though, you know, people have gotten pretty good at saying, like, oh, mums don't have to be perfect. Like, mums can make mistakes or not have to have perfect hair and an apron on and be vacuuming and cooking at the same time whilst raising children and doing everything. Like, we've gotten a little bit better at being, like, open to different kinds of mum, but it's still not, like, I feel like a book like My Extraordinary Mum really shows that a mum doesn't have to be any particular one thing, and that every mum is different.
And there does seem to be dominant narratives out there, you know, whether or not we like it. You know, there's the dominant narrative, you know, the mum who was the housewife, etc. And then 2022, if that's what you want to do and that's your choice and that's right for your family,
embrace it. I love it.
You know, I'm not saying not do these things, but I'm just saying that representation is important of various different mums. And then there was the super mum, as I think you just touched on. Oh, the mum can do everything, but at the expense of what? You know, the expense of her own time, the expense of, you know, doing things and pursuing her own creativity. So I don't want to be super mum either. Like, I think super mum needs to be put on the shelf and dead, you know.
Kill Super Mum by Dani Vee, book 2.
That's the sequel. Yeah, I'm working on the sequel now. I'm not sure if it'll be kid friendly, but even the stereotype and dominant narrative about a single mother, you know, you hear, I'm not going to repeat the words because I don't want to feed into that narrative, but when you ask people, what are the first things you think about a single mother? They're never complimentary, Sarah. So I'm trying to change that narrative of, well, they've got to be pretty resourceful, you know, they've got to be pretty independent, they've got to be a sort of a Jane of all trades, if you like. You know, how about we start changing the narrative and even just having that conversation about choice and about, you know, the dominant narratives. I think they're tired, and I think we definitely need new ones. And we don't need labels, you know, we don't need to be you're the this or you're the that. I mean, there were so many questions about going back to work that I don't think men get. Are you going back to work? How many days are you going back to work? Like, my kid's dad never got asked that question.
People don't tend to ask it. Who'll be looking after the kids while you have a career?
Yeah.
How many times do men get asked that question?
Look, I don't think a lot.
Oh, well, look, I love the book. It's beautiful. I'm so excited for it to be going out into the world. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about your journey to, you know, making this book and being published, and like, let's rewind. Let's go back pre-Words and Nerds.
Oh, wow.
Can we go back to like your journey through becoming a famous podcaster and then an author, and how it happened, and what pre-Dani would have thought of all of this?
Wow. Let's use
Success.
the term fame loosely.
Famous. Renowned and beloved.
Wow, no pressure, Sarah. Look,
I only speak the truth.
I was a teacher. I loved teaching. I taught English, and I, you know, loved the kids. I found that teenagers, particularly, they just bring you so much joy. They bring you sass, but as long as you meet their sass with sass, it's all good, right? So I loved doing that, and I really enjoyed doing that. But when I had my kids, I was working part-time, and I sort of, in a way, I forgot to use my brain in the way that I was used to in terms of looking at literature and analysing text and everything. And so when I talk about parenting in the dark, because there was a lot of time I was parenting literally in the dark. This is not a metaphor, because my older son just literally never slept. And when I say never slept, he would sleep in 45-minute bouts.
Oh my God.
Right? Yeah. So pre-Dani, pre-podcast Dani was very tired. But I also felt like there was that, there was those conversations that I'd missed having with colleagues and missed having with students about, you know, how a text is formed and created and editing. And so I had a friend who was a podcaster. He does the Master Chef sort of podcast with the guests and Bake Off. And he said, just do it. And I'm like, oh, but how do you just do it? And aren't there already podcasts out there and all that stuff? And then, you know, my usual brain kicked in and went, well, just do it. Like, if just your mum listens, that's okay. You're still having those cool conversations, right?
Yeah.
And so I asked John Larkin, who I'd known for quite a while, because he'd, you know, done school visits, and we just sort of clicked, and he said yes, that he'll talk to me. We had this great chat. And then I just asked someone else, and we had a great chat. And I think one of my 10th guests was Jackie French. And once you speak to Jackie French, everyone's like, oh, she mustn't suck too much. I'll speak to her as well. And then it was just about content. It was almost addictive, right? And I'd take these breaks occasionally, and I'd be itching to get back and talk to those, you know, talk to people again about their books, about their creative process. And it's funny because the conversations started about the book, and now they're a little bit about the book, but they're so much more about creativity and where the idea came from, and them as an artist, and, you know, why they write. So the conversations have evolved. So I think that's really interesting, because that's what you can't get from the book.
Yeah.
You know, so you have both. So I just did it. And, you know, first year, I think there were 400 listens from October to December. I'm like, oh, awesome, 400 people have listened. Amazing. And then there was that was in 2019, I think, or 17 actually, 2017. And then 2020, COVID hit, and I thought, well, I'm working from home. Everyone's book events are cancelled. I'll try and do a lot more interviews. So I sort of upped it from 1 to 4 a week, just to try. And then I did multiple sort of, you know, my first episode with multiple people was with Tim Harris and Adrian Beck, and we just had an absolute blast. And from then on, Adrian has sort of been a special host, yes. You know what I mean, a co-host whenever he likes to come in, whenever he feels like it, he'll just pop in and we'll do an interview together. So that really was, you know, born out of a friendship as well, which was really cool. And then, yeah, it was weird in COVID time, the numbers just kept going up and up and up and up. And I thought, well, there's an audience out there, but I've never done it for the numbers. You know, I've done it for the enjoyable conversation. That's just a complete added bonus. And for people to interact with you, you know, on social media, or when you go out and they're like, oh, I love your podcast. Like, it's so cool that you're doing something born out of passion and a kind of a need, you know, to have those conversations and to sort of keep my anxiety in check, because I always need something to channel all this energy I have into positive. Otherwise it spills out in anxiety. So yeah, having people who like those conversations is just a complete added bonus to that. It's a little cherry on top, you know?
It makes for a wonderful podcast. And now here you are, so from 2017 to now, at the very heart of the book industry. And I think you're an institution now. And I feel like when authors have a book coming out, doing a Words and Nerds interview is like the part of the press. Like it's just like a rite of passage. Everyone wants to do it. That's just me praising you. How did that feel?
It always feels weird. And I've had so many conversations about, as a culture, we have to take compliments better, because we're always like, oh, no. And it's really uncomfortable to go, thank you, Sarah, but I'm trying really hard to do that, because I'm a massive compliment giver and not born out of anything but enthusiasm and being genuine. Like, I never say a compliment if I don't mean it. I just feel like often compliments get stuck in your head or they don't come out. And I feel like, how many compliments do you get a week as a general human being? Like, not many. So you just give them out there free.
And accept them with grace.
And try and accept them. But it's really uncomfortable to go, Sarah, that's a lot to take in. But I'm trying to say thank you.
Light of my life. Favourite podcast friend.
But that's how
kindred spirit.
all of the above. But then that's how the contract came about. So we did the Publishing Insider. Adrian and I did the Publishing Insider series, which was just so phenomenally insightful, talking to all the publishers from, 10 different, well, it was publishers and booksellers and editors and agents from, we did 10 episodes. And we just learnt an incredible amount. And then, when I spoke to James from Larrikin House, I was like, I think I could be on brand for that publishing house. I think I've got something a bit quirky that might fit in. And turns out it did.
And now here you are.
Here I am in Booktopia talking to you about my book.
A published author.
Seriously, I feel like I'm going to wake up soon and go, that's a bummer, that wasn't real.
But it's totally really happening in real life right now. And how does it feel?
When I came in and saw like a pile of 250 of my books on the table, it was overwhelming in a really good way. And, it's those moments where you think, is this real? Am I going to wake up? If I don't want to wake up, don't wake me up. If this is a dream, just keep me sleeping. And it's a bit of a wow factor, because I think when you get the publishing contract, there are still so many hurdles to keep going through. You've got to do the editing process, and I think I wrote about 19 different endings because no one was ever happy with the ending. And then there's the, you've got to find the illustrator, not me personally, but the publishing house, and you have to love it, and then you have to go through those edits, and then you have to try and get people to want to talk about your book, and then it goes into bookshops and you have to sell it. And so there's kind of...
It never ends.
It's almost
and then
no
when it's wrapping up, you have to do the next book, right?
And there's no way I'm complaining at all, but it's very rare you get those really excitable moments that I did when I walked into Booktopia, because it's always about, what can I do now? What's the next step? What's expected of me? What do I have to do? I've got to plan this book launch.
You're such a whirling dervish of activity. And of course, the natural question is, Dani, who's looking after the kids? Sorry, I didn't mean that. That was a joke.
School
I'm not asking.
is looking after the kids. Thanks, school. And then grandma.
Shout out to grandma.
Shout out to grandma, who the book is dedicated to, may I say.
Oh, it's such a beautiful dedication. And you mentioned that, can we talk about the illustrations?
Yeah,
because they're absolutely drop dead gorgeous. And what was that process like, working with an illustrator?
Yeah, look, I didn't do a lot of working with her. We left that to our creative director, Mary, who's amazing at this kind of stuff. But we did struggle for a very long time to find the right fit. I guess it just didn't. I think what was amazing was that James, the publisher, Mary, the creative director, Crystal, the editor, and me, we all had exactly the same vision, which I think is quite rare.
Yeah.
We had the same vision for this book, and so we had a couple of samples drawn, and they were, they were great, but they just weren't the vision that we'd shared. And so I remember getting this picture of this mum with the beautiful red hair and the
I've got
sort
such
of
hair envy. She's got the best hair.
and the boheme clothes. And they sent it to me and said, "What do you think?" And I just went, "Oh my God, that's my mum. Like, that's her." And they all went, "We agree."
Wow.
And that was it, So it was just this amazing, and it was hard to find Alexandra Colombo, and Mary did all that. But, when you see it, you know it. It's like when you meet your soulmate, you're like, yes.
No.
I'm looking at you, Sarah.
How did I not realise you are my soulmate?
That was embarrassing.
But it is. You feel a click. You feel,
yeah.
you know, and cast your mind back to Literary Bites at Half-Hour a few years ago when I first met you, and you do. When you're on the same wavelength as someone and you have like a kindred spirit situation, you just feel it straight away.
You
and
do.
It's nice to know you get that same feeling from the illustrator to your story. You just know it clicks.
And you can't ignore those feelings if it's with a person or an activity or whatever it is, that click that goes, this is right for me. Because I think in life it doesn't happen very often.
No, it doesn't.
So when you click with, a romantic partner or a friend or a person or an activity that you do, you have to just lean right into that, because I don't think those moments happen much in life.
Yeah, which is why I'll be moving next door to you. This is the way I'm telling you.
Amazing. I love it. We could have rooftop barbecues together.
It's going to be so fun. I can't wait.
We could have our own reality TV show.
I'm laughing too much to be a professional asker of questions.
I didn't know there were any professionals. We're just
in our solid gold
just
podcast studio. Of course there are.
Opal flooring and here's the foot massager now. Thank you. Great.
Excellent. What a wonderful way to wrap things up with a foot massager. So I'm having way too much fun.
That's a good thing though, right? Can't have too much fun.
It is. So as one of my final rappy-uppy professional podcasty questions, are you able to tell us a little bit about what's up for you next, be that in podcast world or in author world or whatever you can talk about?
Yeah, I just overshare all the time. It's like, what is it? You just do it and then ask for forgiveness later. So I'll just do that. I'll go with that model. Hasn't always worked out for me, but let's go with that today. Podcast, I'm just going to keep going with it. I love creating content. I love putting them out there. I have tried to slow down on being the creator of all the content myself, because I think A, variety is good, and I think B, sometimes I overdo it a little tiny bit. So the takeovers are great, and I've got some spin-offs. So I feel like as long as there's always content going out there, that makes me happy and makes me feel calm, but I don't feel like I need to create it all. I still love doing it, but I also need space for my children, my life, and my, my writing as well, because sometimes that all comes secondary. Not the kids, everyone, but everything else comes secondary. I do pay attention to them.
Who's looking after your children?
They're in the car. No, I'm joking. They're not. They're with their grandma. And they love their grandma. Sometimes I think more than me. That's a whole other story. In terms of books, I've just gotten back the illustrations for my Unlucky Dad series. So I wrote that to brief. So I was doing a little bit of work for Larrikin, because I said, we need to get into literary festivals and we need to be doing this and that. And James is like, sure, you just go do that. So I'm like, okay. And then so we were just chatting one day and he said, I'd always thought about this series of an unlucky dad. And I said, I don't want it to be a hopeless, hapless dad. I think that's been done. I want it to be a really enthusiastic, optimistic, engaged, brilliant dad who loves adventure, but the world is just against him in a fun way. And so I asked him, lots of questions, writing it all down. And then I wrote, Unlucky Dad Goes Camping and Unlucky Dad Goes Fishing. And and so I had my kids as a little test audience, and the first version wasn't funny, the second version wasn't funny apparently according to them. So many versions later I thought, okay, it's ready, to read. And so James read it too, and he fishes, right? My publisher fishes, and so I had to do lots of research about fishing. I watched endless YouTube videos about fishing fails, right? I feel like I know a bit about fishing now. I still don't really want to go fishing, but I know a lot about it. And so he read it to his fishing buddy, and his fishing buddy laughed and spilt tea on his lap. And then we went, okay, we think this works. And so I just got the illos back, and they're just so beautiful and colourful and gorgeous. And so that's nearly ready to go to the printer. And then Unlucky Dad Goes Fishing, that's nearly to be finished illustrating in October.
Amazing.
Exciting, right?
I like it. The Dani Vee universe expanding. Phase 1 we're in.
Phase 1. I don't know what phase 2 looks like. I feel like I'm going to be tired.
Dani, thank you so, so much for coming in and chatting with us today. It's like a delight to see you. It always is. And congratulations on My Extraordinary Mum. And for everyone listening, you can get your copy of My Extraordinary Mum, as well as many of the other books that you may or may not have heard about on the podcast Words and Nerds by
Good
Dani Vee
subtle plug.
at your local bookstore or online at Booktopia.
And there are 250 here, freshly signed.
There are. At the time of recording, there are, but
Fresh.
who knows? Get in quick.
And look, I shout out to JP Pomare, who I did not beat in the signing challenge, but
There's always next time.
next time,
Unlucky Dad's
JP,
won. That's when it's going to
Get
happen.
JP and I in together, and we'll
it.
have a race. Love your work, JP. Just want to beat you. Thanks so much, Sarah. Thank you so much. I want to thank Nick as well and Hannah for today. And just thanks for having me on. It's just been such a buzz to see the books and be sitting here interviewed about my book. I'm like,
Oh, we couldn't be happier to see. Can't wait to interview you about the next one.
amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you to Nina Kenwood and Dani Vee. You can get links to both books in the description right now from booktopia.com.au. And if you enjoyed our show, you can drop us a review on Apple Podcasts, a like on Spotify, wherever you are listening to our show. We want to know what you think. Our Kids Month campaign runs until the end of the month, which gives access to the best kids books that are currently available. So be sure to go ahead and check that out for yourself. Links in the description. We'll catch you on Thursday for our next episode of Tell Me What to Read. But until then, thanks for listening and never stop reading.